Steve Coomes, author, past chef. I'm reading your documentary. I mean, your autobiography or your biography, I should say. You actually started the writing field in 1991. So
That's correct. Yeah.
writing about the restaurant business. And of course, we've known you for many years because of your interest in country ham and I think our interest in bourbon. So there's a lot of things that we have in common in that respect.
Don't leave out that tequila link either.
Yeah, the tequila too. Yeah. There's no question the one that you sent me as a sample was the best one. I can't even remember the name of it now, but that was
the Still Strength Casa Noble Joven, wasn't it?
It was the one where looked like it had a golf ball on the top of it.
Oh, that was as a sample. No, that was a whole bottle of Fortaleza Blanco. Isn't that fantastic?
I consider a bottle a sample. So I have just a little bit of that. I mean, I've been delving that out to people that consider themselves tequila experts. And everybody's in agreement. So, as a matter of fact, I wasn't paying attention one evening, and two of my friends got into it further than I wanted them to before I pulled it away from them.
There's more of that where that comes from.
Well, first of all of us in the country ham industry certainly appreciate your interest in the country ham world and the direction of the history of where we've been and where we hope to go. And you and I have had long discussions. I think Keith has also participated in quite a few of those discussions about what we should do and how can we keep the tradition alive. I think our customers, we've been kind of surprised at how interested they are in what we do, how we do it, what are our plans for the future, that kind of thing. So I'll let you we'll kind of meander through this and see what comes about from the conversation.
Well, thanks for having me, guys, and I appreciate it. Always good to see you. For all 9 listeners out there, just a quickie background on me, and Sam is correct. I was a chef, and I have written about the food business for about 30 years, but in the last 7 or 8, I was a slow comer to bourbon here in Kentucky. I'm 55, and to think that I was 48 when I caught on. I began writing quite a bit about spirits, which is a fascinating industry. And true story is I was writing my book. What was it? What's the name of it? Country Ham, A Southern Tradition of Hogs, Salt, and Smoke.
Mm-hmm.
Editing it one night, I was nibbling on some country ham and sipping a little bourbon. And I thought, wow, this really goes well. This really goes well together. And if there's typos in that area of the book, understand that's what's going on. But out of that came a bunch of food and whiskey pairings, which are ongoing today and a significant part of my business. And I love it. I love seeing people, number one, eat country ham like sliced prosciutto style, which we all know is absolutely fantastic. And then in many cases, drink whiskey straight. Many people don't do that. They tend to blunt it with a cocktail, which is just fine by me. But they really get it when they put the two together and see these two American crafts, how well they work together. And I think there's such a future in that, not only for my business, but for cooperational roles between the two businesses, the American spirits industry and country ham. And to kind of fast forward to now, I don't know why I haven't had this thought before, and forgive me if I've already shared this with any of you guys. I see country ham poised to take off, or has the ability to take off, just the way the bourbon industry did almost 20 years ago now, in that it was a well-established American craft that didn't get the respect that it deserved. And hey, some goobers like me stumbled across it, let's talk about bourbon specifically, and said, oh my gosh, this is great. Oh yeah, it's all here in Kentucky. Oh yeah, we make the finest example of it in the world. And look what's happened now, because people are nuts about bourbon, and Scotch is suffering, and suffering here at the very least. And it wasn't so much a waving of the American flag, but a high degree of respect for a well-made product that was all American. and beneficial to this population to celebrate both, in enjoying it, but in the money that it brings in. I mean, it's an $8.3 billion industry in Kentucky, just whiskey making. And it's not, and there's so much more to grow. There's so much room to grow just in the United States. I do a lot of business in Ohio, and I go to look at these bars, and they're clear bottles, then brown on the ends, and some is scotch and rum, and a little bit is bourbon. Or I go to Florida, and I'll see liquor stores with bourbon, but I don't see many bars with it. Again, it's all clear bottles. It's vodka and gin, and I'm a gin fan, so I'm okay with that. But there's so much room to grow in our own turf, and I think exactly the opportunity lies in front of Country Ham Cures to do that as well with an all-American craft. I mean, ours is distinctly different, as we know, from what is made in Spain and Italy. And now it's just taking off in the form of charcuterie. You have thousands of people curing hams in their old refrigerators at home. And I see it happening just like what happened to the craft beer movement as well, that people start out at home, legal brewing, and they eventually turn these things into businesses. And America, without a doubt, produces the finest beers, finest array of craft beers anywhere in the world. So that we're on the precipice of that. Or I shouldn't say we, so I'm not making any country hams. In fact, I'm ruining a couple actually as we speak. Don't you agree? Don't you see the opportunity out there?
Sure. So Salt Cured Pig, which is a group of country ham or dry cured meat enthusiasts.
Enthusiasts is putting it kindly. They are lunatics. I love them.
How many, Keith? How many is in that group?
There are currently over 27,000 across the country in their social media group on Facebook, and it's anywhere from chefs to pros to home crafters. Yeah, like you said, Steve, quite a few of them are destroying. I see some of the pictures that they put out there on Facebook, and it's like, what did I do wrong? And it's like, man, I don't where to begin. But it is. I mean, it's a learned art. It's a learned craft, but it's great to see the passion behind it out there from so many people.
It is. And if it can happen at home, it certainly can accelerate in the professional space. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, growing up in the business, I mean, curing a country ham to me is second nature, is because I've been exposed to it since I was a kid, knowing what to look for and how to do it. And it's not rocket science, but there are little things that I just assumed everybody knew and they don't. Right. And if you don't pay attention to those details and use your sense of smell, touch, eyesight, taste, to make adjustments during the curing process, quite a bit of it can be put down in a standard operating procedure, so to speak, but there's still some tweaking that has to be done during that phase. And once you've done it once correctly and you pay attention to every step, then you can duplicate that over and over again. But there's a whole lot of things that I've learned over the course of time. I talked to other country ham producers about this that they kind of forget. For instance, a guy was just telling me the other day he was having problems with he built a brand new, or modified a room in his plant to put hams in for the wintertime room. Well, the floor wasn't insulated, and he got the temperature down to 38 degrees, but the heat coming up from the ground was affecting how the hams cured, and his spoilage rate in that one room was higher. And he said, I knew that. I made the same mistake 30 years ago, and just have to be reminded. But little things like that that people don't know, maybe how important it is with temperature, especially in the beginning curing stages, to get that right. And I don't know how these guys used to do it ambient. I mean, I do know how they did it, but their spoilage rate had to have been pretty high, considering Mother Nature, especially in Virginia, can throw you a 70-degree day in the middle of, you had a hog killing on let's say the first week of January, that the temperatures were, 30 degrees. And then 2 weeks later, Virginia throws you a couple 70-degree days. Yeah. Well, during that first step of the curing process, that's not a good thing. And that will definitely cause you some spoilage issues that you don't discover till you finish curing, and aging. I mean, some of them will obviously rot quick and you'll know it and you'll throw them out. But again, and I'm sure like in your book, there's steps and processes that you can look at and read about that. Just got to pay attention to it.
That was one of the big critiques of the book. There were two. Was I didn't have enough recipes and I didn't go far enough into the DIY part of it. So readers, I forgive you, or forgive me for that rather. It's interesting what you mentioned about scale, and how you guys do it so much larger. I just did a large piece for a distillery here, story, I should say, about craft, because they hear about craft distilling all the time. And I'm sure you hear craft charcuterie and all these kinds of things that are attributed to small businesses or people who are literally hands-on every day, touching the pork and doing what it takes to make great stuff. And one of the guys I interviewed for the story was Max Shapiro, who is the president of Heaven Hill. And he said, we just do it at scale. We just do craft at scale. He said, our machinery is bigger, but you still have to be involved in every nuance of the process to control the craft of it. And it really made a lot of sense. One of the other people interviewed was a guy that has a brandy distillery. It actually would be considered a craft size. And he said, craft was a term commandeered by the craft brewing people who literally were saying, ours is better than big beer. It's lager all across America, coast to coast, nothing unique, nothing new, nothing dramatically flavored. And that was true for a time, but it doesn't pass even in the standards of the country ham business, where you guys used to do 50,000 a year, right? And they all were pretty much the same and done the same way. And it's important. Again, I don't think the American public by and large knows that.
Right. Well, I've had craft brewery guys tell me, he said, now that I'm into this and I understand what it takes to do what we do, he says, I have to tip my hat to these large brewers, even though their beer that they make is in mass quantities and it's not as nuanced in flavor as maybe theirs is, but they've chosen, well, I'll take Budweiser, for instance, they've chosen to make their beer the way it tastes. And they're able to do it consistently no matter where you get it. He said it's so hard to do.
Right.
And what he's trying to do is the same thing, but with his unique ingredients and flavor profiles that he's developing, and to be consistent with it. So every time you get one of his beers, it tastes the same.
Yeah.
He says sometimes that's why he only does one for 3 months, because he begins to realize that he can't duplicate that flavor profile year round.
Oh, sure. Yeah. And another tip of the hat to Budweiser and Miller and those guys, they did the bloody hardest style of beer, and that's lager. I mean, that takes a month, and it has to be done cold. In fact, Louisville was, I believe, back in the 1800s, was the southernmost point in the United States that you could really make lager on a large scale. And you can go to some areas around the city and see lagering caves that were dug out and lined with rock so they could put their beer in there to age for a while. But they would shut it down about May, and they couldn't do it again until October. But you'd said, interestingly, about Virginia throwing you a 70-degree day. For the 9 of you out there listening today, we a little, if you don't know enough about American geographical history, Kentucky was part of Virginia first before we broke off and made a state of it. Don't ask me how that part happened. But we have the same weather. And somebody said to me yesterday, I'm really struggling to remember who it was. It was a woman who was about my age, and she said, in that Thanksgiving, we were slipping on the ice. Thanksgiving. That's been a long, long time since we had that cold a Thanksgiving. When it was, as my mother's parents did, they slaughtered hogs on Thanksgiving. The women started the meal. The guys started slaughtering hogs because they were going to be off the next day if they were factory workers. And in came the parts that the women ground into sausage or did whatever to, but it was always cold enough. And it's not like that now.
No, it's not. If it is, it's very, very rare. It would be a weird year to have. Well, certainly not in Thanksgiving in Virginia. I mean, we're actually, was it this year that was so warm? January, February, March. It's wet, but not that chilly at all.
Yeah.
I don't think we even had a 20-degree day. which is really unusual.
Well, just for a little bit of, amateur hours, we'll say, I did 2 hams in a refrigerator for 2 solid months. Thought they're in great enough shape. Took them down to, everybody familiar with Booker No bourbon?
Yeah.
Booker's. Well,
Yep.
So his son Fred, who's the master distiller at Jim Beam, he and his son Freddie maintained their father's ham house, and it used to be, it was built in the 1800s. The home where they live, where the Beam family lived, was a military school in the 1820s. And so they built a circular, just exterior, room, garage, as it were, out of brick. And that's where they kept the armaments for the military school. And Booker No turned that into a ham house. And you could, if you had organized everything correctly, easily cure 100 hams in there. It's great space. Everything's way up into a witch's peak.
No, I know exactly
roof.
what you're talking about. Yeah, they've got some in Williamsburg design like that.
No kidding. So, but I went yesterday to go see how the hams were doing, and theirs were ruined and ours were ruined. And I even had pillowcases over mine, and somehow bugs still got in.
Mm.
And so, talking about disappointing, I thought, well, this is going to be the year that I get them right, because it started it well, and we had a decently cold winter. But the bugs got there first.
Yeah, well, when on the farm, if you got bugs in it, you still kept curing them. At the end of the year, you just, when it was time, they got enough age on them, you just took your knife out and whittled yourself around all that, whatever, unless it was just totally infested with it. But one of the things we talked about a couple of weeks ago was, what did they do to protect themselves from those insects? And of course, they screened the heck out of their smokehouse, made sure that they couldn't get in, kept the door shut, actually had a screen door on the door so that they could, when they opened a heavy door, they had a screen behind it, and you made sure you went in real quick, and they just paid attention to it. But They also covered the hams with borax soap to protect against insects. And I think some farmers are still doing that. But one gentleman brought up about he had witnessed in Australia where they used ashes from the fire that they used to smoke the hams with, and they buried the hams in ashes after they'd aged a certain amount of time. He thought it was part of the curing process, but that's actually another insect repellent, or a way to keep the insects off, because they won't go into that ash. Yeah. I'm not sure. You still have to put it in a muslin bag. Some people don't or didn't, and they just wash it off, or, shave that skin off. Same thing with borax soap that they put on the surface to keep the mites and the bugs off. When it came time to eat the ham, they washed that off and then took a knife and just shaved a little thin piece off of the surface apparently it didn't penetrate. Years ago when I was a kid, there were carboys full of borax soap around the facility that I thought was used for cleaning, but that was like 1930s excess stock that they never used from when they used to put borax soap on the hams hanging in the smokehouse, which somewhere in that period of time, USDA said, I can't do that anymore, even though there's people that still do that.
Professional cures? I mean, commercial cures?
No, not professional. Home cures. And, as long as you clean it up good before you eat it, apparently I'm not recommending that. I'm not saying that's a USDA approved process, but that is what some people do.
It's interesting you made the point about the warmth getting through that uninsulated floor, because that's what Fred No is thinking. He didn't mention warmth, but he said it just seems more humid in this smokehouse than it has forever.
Of course it would.
And he said, of course, the rain is high, and they just built a gorgeous pool next to it about a year ago. And he really believes that somehow there's some moisture migration there. And he said that his dad, Booker, always preferred a dirt floor, which is what he was, they cured their own hams on the farm growing up. So he was kind of had mixed feelings about the concrete floor. You got any opinion on that, Sam?
Well, moisture certainly is going to have an impact, but if you take, again, temperature of the environment, the ambient temperature when you take them out of salt, for that first 2 to 3 weeks after it's come out of salt is also important. If it's too warm, like above 60, then you're going to have some spoilage issues.
Right.
You've got to preferably keep it in the 40 to 50 degree range, even after you take them out of salt.
Right.
Moisture too, obviously, if if you're running 80, 90% relative humidity inside of that place. And of course the meat itself is producing,
it's a wet body.
It's adding moisture. I would, this kind of goes against the grain of, so when they built smokehouses designed to be smokehouses, in the eaves is open so that the natural airflow can flow through, but it's screened so the insects can't get in. So if it's sealed off, like if it was an ammunition storage, they probably want to keep that ammo dry. So I'm not sure how much airflow they had going through there.
Yeah. I'm sure there was literal that was powder. They didn't have cartridges back then.
Yeah. So
good point.
So maybe opening the eaves up or putting some fans in there to keep the air circulating would help that situation. But I mean, I'd be glad to come out and exchange, for some samples, do some consulting work.
I guarantee, I absolutely guarantee they would be all over that. Hope there's no Beam employees listening to this, but I know Mr. Fred No and Distiller Freddie No would also approve of that.
Yeah, well, that'd be
They'd
fun.
be all over it. They're some of the nicest people you ever meet.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Set me up to make my own bourbon back in Virginia too. Just my own.
Hey, I'm supporting today. By the way, can y'all see that? That's
Virginia
my
Distillery.
bedhead, Virginia Distillery. Boy, that's a hell of an operation. I don't know if you guys have ever seen it.
No, I have. Sammy might have.
Yeah, no, they do some great work, and I've had the opportunity to work a few events with them. Larger scale events. Virginia Wine Expo, they do an event called Smoked, and there it is. And the last time we did that one, there were just about 15 of us throwing down food, and they also had 14 Virginia distillers on the floor. And those guys were awesome to work with. We've actually done several tastings with another local one, Ironclad. They're doing small batch bourbons. And we've done 2 tastings with them where, 25, 30 guests come in. We would go through 4 different hams and 4 or 5 different 4 hams and a dry cured lamb. And they would pair it up with 5 very specific cocktails or shots specifically paired with the flavor profile of each of the product we brought in. And, it was great. That's where, for me, that's where it's a blast. You get to take people down the rabbit hole, whether it's, what we're doing with hams, what they're doing with bourbons, and the similarities between the two. I think a lot of people don't realize, it's our running joke as you get people together and we're trying to convince the guests that we're going to talk about temperature abuse and bacteria and fermentation and all these things that go against keeping a person healthy, but you end up creating these marvelous foods and beverages that pair beautifully together. We actually gave them the last one we did. The first one we did, I gave them a ham, and I guess it had about 8 months age on it, and we hung it in their barrel aging room, and it hung in there for. This was actually at Ironclad.
Okay,
and we hung that ham in their aging room and then went back 9 months later to do another tasting event, another pairing event. And we actually carved off of that ham, and it was, it was cool. It very subtle, if any, flavor profile change, maybe a little bit just on the outside. But just from the visual of a country ham hanging in a barrel aging room was great. And that was an amazing ham. That wasn't one of the heritage breed. That was one of our wigwams that we let go with a lot of extra age. And Owen over there has been after me about another ham that he can hang in his room ever since. But I think, that's where it's the educational aspect, I think is key.
I really think though, if we took a ham that was like 60 days old, in other words, it had gone through the curing, the equalization, springtime, and then smoke. And right after we smoked it, put it in one of those barrel aging rooms with that strong bourbon aroma and hung it up then while the ham is still soft on the surface. I think you would pick up more of that flavor profile, at least in smell. And that's half of when you're eating something. It's what the aroma is that you get it might be on the edge, but it's amazing how much smoke can get into a ham all the way almost to the center, just from application, on the surface, if you do it at the right time.
How long do you guys smoke, and at what point in the process do you smoke?
Right after spring. So we're at 40 degrees in salt, and then wash the excess salt off for 30 days roughly. And then 3 weeks in springtime at 50 degrees, 80% humidity. And then we gradually bring the temperature up to from 60, 70, 85 degrees in the beginning days of smoking for 3 days. And we start the smoke right away and gradually bring that temperature up and then hold it for the balance of the week, which is 4 days at 85 degrees until we get a dark mahogany color. But it takes about 7 days, smoking 24 hours a day. Now, on the farm, they don't typically do that 24 hours. It's like during the day. So you'd have to double or triple it depending on how much time you're smoking it during the day to get the same number of hours. Some people prefer lighter smoke. We went for the more darker mahogany color. It also helps shelf stability on the surface. So it's an antimicrobial. We also know that insects don't like smoke. And what our family used to use as a quote insect repellent under USDA rules is black pepper. Insects don't like pepper. A lot of people, I had a guy in North Carolina tell me, y'all put pepper on hams because you're trying to hide the imperfections of your ham. This is from a guy in North Carolina who didn't believe putting pepper on ham. And pepper does have some impact right on the surface, but not down in the middle of the ham. It was solely there in the good old days, for insect protection.
How thick was that coating, or was it just kind of just a liberal sprinkling of pepper?
You put it on there right after you washed it, so it stuck, and it was black pepper, and coarse, not fine, but coarse black pepper. And the fresher, the better. If you have a cycle of, I don't know, if you kept pepper longer than 90 days, it starts losing its oomph. Sure. So we would buy just enough to get us 90 days worth, and then keep that nice and fresh and pungent.
Right.
And Sam, if I'm not mistaken, when the pepper started getting too expensive is when the borax kind of came into play back in the day, didn't it?
Well, I'm not sure about that. I think borax was the one of choice because it was so effective. I mean, apparently that was before my time. I wouldn't even have known about that if I hadn't stumbled across those borax carboys. But I do know that there are times when pepper gets outrageously priced. But it served its purpose. It's better to save the ham than not, so to speak.
Yeah. So how many hams would have been made back then that you guys washed and then peppered again? I mean, that sounds labor intense.
Well, all the hams we wash after they've been in salt, we wash the excess salt off, and we peppered them. So it would, I don't know, 30,000 pieces. Yeah. Back when and then we stopped putting pepper on it, mainly because by the time we got into the 50s, again, this is before my time, but is when we got better at temperature control rooms and no ambient. Well, I shouldn't say no ambient. We've always had some ambient as we saw fit, but this very insect proof. Just really pay attention to that. Fly fans everywhere, But anyway, so we stopped putting pepper on it because before you cook them, we'd have to wash the pepper off before we cook the ham. So why put pepper on them if you end up washing them off? So,
well,
Steve, that's one thing.
Go ahead, Keith. Go ahead.
Everything, so you mentioned labor intensive. Every single ham gets handled multiple times. There are no machines doing this. The only equipment we have is the smoke generator and our climate control. Other than that, I mean, every ham that comes in is hand rubbed with the dry salt cure. It's stacked after 5 days on cure. Each ham is hand rubbed again to make sure we get that really solid coating of salt that we're looking for. They're washed, they're hand put in, nets and hand hung on the racks. And then they stay on the racks from the whole time, from there through their done aging and then final production. But yeah, there's no real equipment involved in anything other than human hands doing the work. As Sam mentioned before, it's all 5 senses, and the sound comes in now because we have to listen and make sure those fans are running right. It's a smoke generator, so that's where you listen for things that aren't necessarily happening. But other than that, it's about as labor intensive you can get out there.
Yeah, there's no question about it. And that goes back to that point of craft. I mean, how much more crafty can you be, as it were, than to touch it that many times?
You brought up too about American versus European. Is the statistics that I've seen is roughly 2 million dry cured style hams coming into this country from Europe, Italy, Spain, I believe some from Germany also, maybe other countries. But I mean, 2 million hams, that's in the overall scheme of meat, maybe not a lot, but in the dry cured world, that's a lot of hams coming in from Europe. And the country ham industry over the course of time has shrunk during this time that the Europeans' numbers have risen. And so we all scratch our heads as to what's going on. Well, marketing, perception of the product being premium, and they're willing to pay literally, $400 to $3,000 a ham, which we all scratch our heads at too. And so we kind of figured out, all right, well, let's some of us are starting to make, premium grade, long aged hams to compete with that style of ham. But to get our customers to understand that and recognize that, and not just us. I mean, it's anybody that's making dry cured meats in this country. I think that's important to get that message out to the American consumer that we can actually produce a ham and we've actually, I don't want to say proven it. I mean, Keith can talk about some of our taste testings that we've done with chefs and food writers across the country, and you participated in some of those too, Steve.
No, I didn't.
Yes. No, I think you've done your own. Haven't you done your own with the bourbon guys, like multiple different country hams?
Oh yeah. I've done lots of those, but I remember those incredible ones that you guys did. Was it in Brooklyn that time?
Brooklyn, San Francisco, Napa.
Louisville wasn't on the list.
No, but those were the 3 big ones. And, we've done a number of, individual ones, whether it's with a distiller, a craft brewer, a cidery, and those. Yeah, and that's where, we do get that opportunity. The 3 big ones we actually looked at a total of 17 different long-aged dry-cured hams from around the world. We had 4 from Spain, different regions, different breeds, 4 from Italy, same thing, different regions, different breeds, and then the balance were domestic. And it was really kind of cool to see where it came down to the breed, the feed, how they were raised, how they were cured, the age on them, the terroir, everything involved had a unique impact. And, when it came to our traditional country ham, maybe some of the younger European style hams, but when you got into our Suriano, where we're using the heritage breed, flavor profile wise, blind tasting, 120 people total by the time we got done with it. We were right there with the best prosciuttos coming out of Italy and the best Serranos coming out of Spain as far as overall flavor notes on the ham. And, some of our fellow domestic ham curers are like, man, I don't believe this. Why are you, promoting your competition? It's like, this isn't about competition. This is about education. Sure. And that's really a big shift that we took here at Edwards probably about 10 years ago to really start driving that point home about educating the consumer, not just to our craft, but you know what, we're doing some great work here domestically. You don't have to go out and buy those premium European hams when you have it right here in your backyard. So, and that's again, taking people down the trip down that rabbit hole is, I mean, it's good for them, but it's an absolute blast for us to see the little light bulbs go off and turn them on to the history and heritage of what we've done with domestic charcuterie, cured hams in particular here in this country for over 412 years now.
Yeah. I mean, I think of that Bible quote when Jesus said a prophet gets no honor in his hometown. I mean, and it's kind of that way with, I think, especially down south with country ham, because it's country ham, right? That's one thing. And then it's not even self-deprecating, it's self-insulting, I think, to some point. And when I did the book, gosh, 6 years ago, can you believe it? It seemed like anybody that I talked to above the Mason-Dixon line and across the Mississippi at that time has no concept of a cooked country ham. They just see it as American cured ham. And that was really eye-opening for me. And do you find that as you guys travel the country that people are more open to the charcuterie use of that ham than they are down here where we all are in the South?
Oh yeah. You go into the Northeast and the larger urban areas too, like in New York, DC, Chicago, Denver, LA. They understand what that style of ham is. And if you go in the South and you carve off a thin slice like you would a prosciutto, uncooked, I'm not eating raw pork. I mean, it's just this mindset of it has to be fried, cut a fourth of an inch thick in red eye gravy and on biscuits. Well, that's also part of our industry, but there's also this. I mean, it's just any industry, whether it's wine, anybody that does fermented product, wine, cheese, bourbon. They've got different grades of what they make, and some they all impart a different flavor profile. We've done the same thing, have been doing it. I mean, our original flagship product was in that 12 to 18 month category. That's what we started out curing. And over the course of time, because grocery stores beat you up on the price so much, the country ham industry said, well, how can we make it cheaper? Well, we can make it cheaper by not aging it as long, not using as higher quality salt, not buying a higher quality pork. Cheap, to the point you're selling it for 99 cents a pound and nobody's making money. Right. And that's one of the reasons why the country ham industry has shrunk over the course of time, because in my opinion, we shot ourselves in the foot and run ourselves out of business because we couldn't maintain the margins. And we allowed our customers to dictate the pricing that we needed to sell it for, because we competed against each other, and he who had the cheapest price was going to win. At the end of the day, I can think of 3 right off the top of my head who are out of the business now in my mind, solely because I don't care what it cost you. They panicked and was dump their product on the market just to get rid of it, to start all over again. Well, you know what? Country hams, if you don't sell them, hold on to them. They're not going to go bad. You just sell them next year. It may be hopefully a little more per pound because you're going to take some shrink, but don't sell it at a loss. And those guys that consistently sold it at break even or loss, or thought they were making money, maybe a penny or 2 or 3 cents a pound, volume will make up the difference, right?
Sure.
But you can be off a little bit on your yields, and before you know it, you've lost money for the whole year.
That's actually, Steve, that's one of my favorite stories. Needless to say, when you're working with a 3rd generation owned and operated company, you get a lot of stories. There was one when I first started here about over 10 and a half years ago now. There was one year when Sam first came on, started selling hams. He goes, I'm going to grow the business. I'm going to grow the business. I'm going to grow the business. And his dad, and the game plan was to go after that young white bag country ham business. And his dad said, all right, you just go along. And at the end of the year, they came back that Sam was so anxious to look at the numbers, and he's like, look at the tonnage. My tonnage is up 100,000 pounds, but we didn't make any money. What's the deal? And his dad just said, his dad let him, his pop let Sam three learn a valuable lesson there, that it's not always about volume. It's about sticking true to what you do and, selling it for what it's worth. That's the key.
He definitely let me hang myself that year.
So how do you reverse or change that mindset? I mean, I don't. Bourbon was really lucky in that the whiskey nerds of the United States, told them what it was worth, and it took them 10 years to go, yeah, really? Are people really going to like this? Well, they liked it 100 years ago. What are you asking? Mm-hmm. So they got lucky in that respect, and social media popularized it again. And as it caught on and people were showing off their grand collections and the Van Winkle bottles, which nobody would touch, all of a sudden started to move at absurd prices. And now this whole fear of missing out is there. And how does that happen again in country ham? Or do you just even rename it? Just take away the country and just call it American style cured ham?
Yeah. There are some folks out there that are doing a good job with that, meaning changing the mindset of hams made in the USA. Basically, they're country ham, but renamed them something else. And I think by the time you put prosciutto style or Iberico, but European style ham, then automatically people think it's going to think, okay, well, that's why it's more expensive. But really, it's what Keith was talking about. What we were trying to do before the F word, fire.
Yeah.
Was educate. Yeah. So we were on the path of educating people about why wouldn't you buy an American made ham? Look at how our flavor profile stacks up against those $3,000 hams. And it was working. And trust me, Louisville was next on the list.
Yeah. I think, it's also getting the chefs involved out there, Steve.
Yes.
I mean, when you get into it into the food service side, grocers are going to sell what grocers are going to sell, and they're always looking at price point. But when you get into the chefs, as Sam mentioned, in the Northeast region, out west, certainly on the West Coast, and even some chefs in the South, and that's one been a great proponent for us, are a number of chefs even in the South have started to truly appreciate the American cured ham and the longer aged one. So, it's partnering with chefs, getting them doing charcuterie boards, which educates the public, which in turn go back to the grocers and say, hey, why can't we get this? And, we had to start here in Virginia, and then start reaching out a little bit and developing those markets where the chef partnerships really came into play. When you get the ability to work with restaurants the caliber of David Chang in New York and his markets, but then also you go down into Atlanta and you have Mashama Bailey down there.
Linton Hopkins.
Linton has been. I mean, I would ship a hoof-on Suriano ham somewhere in the country at least 5 times a year when Linton would go out and do something. Stephen Barber out in Napa, same thing. Out at Farmstead, he works a number of events, and before he started curing his own on site, whenever he went out, it's like, hey, I need a ham shipped to Aspen. I need a ham shipped to wherever. The food festivals or special events that they were working, we ship the hoof on. So it's certainly, us doing what we can with tastings and pairing up with distillers. It's partnering with chefs who appreciate, what we bring to the table. And then eventually the American consumer gets it. And, it's a definite grassroots thing. Huge marketing, that just gets you a big name ham with no craft behind it. And, it's the quality isn't there. It's a shorter age, price point driven product. And that's not going to end up on a Top Chef charcuterie board. So it's that grassroots movement that we've really been trying to be. And like you said, with bourbon, it took 10 years. We're at
and what happened very similarly to American whiskey was the cocktail movement. I mean, all of a sudden, Dale DeGroff, this great bartender at the Rainbow Room, if you ever got to go there in New York, it was the prettiest view in New York. He's like, I'm kind of tired of doing vodka soda or whatever, and he dug out some old books and began making pre-prohibition cocktails. He's like, wow, these are a whole lot like the cocktails I was trained to make, but nobody asked for. And New York was definitely the epicenter of the cocktail movement. And the nice thing for the bourbon industry, which you guys lack, is they had instant footprint. It's like, we've got Rittenhouse Rye in Washington, we got it in Florida. So start making cocktails with that. And it just took off. But it really was, just like you're saying, Keith, it's still a grassroots movement of people being introduced. We always joke in the whiskey business that cocktails is the gateway drug, to the neat presentation of whiskey. And it's true, but you get to have so many points of purchase and so many points of production instantly. And that's great. So how do you make that happen when you have the F word at Edwards when they can't produce what they used to produce, and there are only a handful of other providers out there who can produce at any volume that might get it cross country fast enough, but still.
We're getting there. It's you mentioned the gateway. It's funny, because a lot of consumers do have that perception that country hams are dry, tough, salty. I call it the 9-volt battery salt, because a lot of them are. They're down on salt for 50 days. They get as much moisture out as they possibly can. So the salt is the first thing that just lights you up, and a lot of people don't. They don't like that. It's not a pleasant flavor profile, and that's where we do the 3 different age hams across the board, and then we get into the long age Suriano. And we actually, our youngest ham, dry cured, smoked, 3-month age. It's more of a sea air, briny salt, a very mellow finish. And I actually call that my gateway country ham. It's a great way to get the consumer kind of dialed back in, realizing we're doing some great work here domestically. And then again, it's the rabbit hole. It opens the door to start teaching them about the craft and everything that goes into what we do, but also the longer the age, the more it's developed, the different breed, you get a completely different product out of it. And so yeah, gateway whiskey, gateway ham, you got to start them small and then get them into the real deal.
Well, and they also would always think, like you're saying, a younger, milder ham, sometimes it's a lower proof whiskey, but that wasn't Booker No's thing. Booker No believed if you could just get it, his namesake whiskey is 128 proof. And he would just always say, if you can get people to taste it, they'll buy it. And he was right. But I always love telling this story on my wife. She came onto bourbon slower than I, and I was doing a ham pairing presentation with Jim Beam. And she said, okay, I'm putting my big girl panties on, and I'm going to go to that pairing with you, and I'm going to taste everything they put in front of me. She went from zero love of bourbon to falling in love with Booker's. 128 proof.
Wow.
Yeah.
She was ready.
She was ready. She just didn't know it.
Yeah.
Hey, and I'm going to do a little side trip here and tell you something kind of exciting. So I was looking at, I keep my 2 monitors on here to put a little light on my face because it's been so cloudy here. It's not that I'm that vain, clearly, but I keep moving my mouse to keep these on to kind of, make some decent lighting. And I got this email from the St. Louis Bourbon Society to say that their upcoming ham and whiskey pairing was sold out in 5 days. And this is going to be a virtual pairing. 5 days.
Wow.
So it was like 80 tickets. It's all going to be online. So maybe we need to talk about ham for that, Keith.
Yep.
Absolutely.
I think I may have told you, Sam, that I had just bought about $400 worth of ham for a bunch of pairings in March. It's like they all went away. So I have to check my inventory, but still, that's amazing for that to happen. And again, that proves my rule. Right across the Mississippi River, there's a respect for this and an excitement for this, and I'm excited about that. And
well, we appreciate all that you do as a writer, because your experience, number one, what you've done in the past, and also the fact that you're connected with the bourbon industry and the country ham industry too, and you consistently see the connection. Chefs, writers like yourself, the country ham industry certainly is going to rely on important feedback too. I mean, you've been helpful in suggesting things for the country ham industry that may get our customers more interested in what we do. And, we're all for it, and our intent is to keep this thing going. So we appreciate any other free consulting work is great. We appreciate that.
Yeah. Steve, I think we need to do our own thing. You get with the where you were curing your hams before with the old ammo site, and that bourbon and Edwards, and we create our own virtual tasting event.
Absolutely.
Well, I can't do a virtual consulting work on the ammo hut. I mean, I've got to actually come there and put my hands on it, and so I'm gonna.
You have no idea how they would throw the door wide open for you. How nice to know family is.
I would love to participate in that. We'll wait to the. Hopefully, this COVID thing's gonna be done by next spring, and we'll be able to get out and about freely. I keep threatening here at the office that I'm going to get one of those massive RVs and just go on tour. And when I say go on tour, going and visiting distilleries and wineries and cheese places, and making the connection between what we do and what they do, because I think that's exactly what it is.
I'm surprised. It just occurred to me that I'm surprised that nobody has done a charcuterie truck yet. Like another food truck. Mm-hmm. Granted, you couldn't cut to order. It would, you'd have a line a mile long, and you get 10 of those people fed in the first hour. But
right.
But
that's a good point. Write that down, quick.
I'll send the bill.
Yeah,
for that great idea.
And he'll pay you in ham, guaranteed.
Yeah, a tasting RV. There we go.
Gosh, that's funny. It seems like I have one more question for you guys. Oh, did I tell you, Sam, and we talked a couple of months ago about that American cured ham bar in New York called
Yes, we're selling them. We've been selling them.
Wow, why is that not in Louisville, Kentucky? I mean, the guy, well, he's actually pairing everything with wine, but we should be doing it here with whiskey.
Mm-hmm. No, I hear you. I think it's a great idea.
So for the 9 listeners out there, what we're talking about is there's a gentleman in Brooklyn who was a sommelier at Per Se, Thomas Keller's restaurant in Manhattan. And he went off on his own and launched an strictly American cured ham bar, right? I don't think were there any Italians or Spaniards on there? I can't recall. And he really wants to highlight that craft. And there's some nice cheeses. I believe he does have not a deli, but maybe a cheese and wine shop. But he was pairing everything with his knowledge of wine and his love of ham. He was putting them together, and dun dun dun. Then came COVID. But what a cool idea! And why is there not like a million of these things across the country?
Yeah. We actually had a customer up in the DC market who was doing that with sherry, and his focus was Spanish hams. Needless to say, pairing it with sherry because that's super big over there. Until he discovered our Suriano. And then we actually ended up having 2. We had our Wigwam and our Suriano. And then when we did the limited release peanut fed, and he said it was really cool to see the reaction of his guests coming in, oh, jamón ibérico bellota, and then trying our Suriano and being blown away by it. So it's, but yeah, there are a few of them that are out there. We just, we need more of them. Can't go wrong.
Tell me again and for any listener that may not know the difference between the Suriano and the Wigwam, what is the difference?
The big difference is the Suriano. We're using heritage breed pigs like the Berkshire, the Red Wattle, Gloucester Old Spots, Big Blacks, but the majority of it's Burke. And the Burke, because of its heavier fat content and marbling, lends itself to aging a ham that long, keeps the ham moisture and gives you that kind of buttery taste when you slice it thin like that. The wigwam ham, which was our flagship, what my grandfather started with, that was his flagship product. We were using, up until this year, we were using what I call the pink pig or the commodity grade pig to cure it, because it wasn't as old, so it wasn't as reliable and kept the cost down. But this year, we decided to make our wigwams with the heritage breed. So there's going to be some people and we haven't promoted that idea, but it's in the catalog this year, made from the Berkshire pig. And I think some people are going to go, wow, this is, I think, significantly different than what I've experienced in the past.
And Steve, if you look right behind Sam on the wall behind him, that's actually a picture of his grandfather holding a ham, that old black and white hanging out in one of the old.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So how will I've had the Suriano many times. Thank you very much. But how will the flavor differ, if much at all, from the wigwam? It's not aged as long, right?
Yeah, well, the wigwam and I'll cut, the younger ham that I mentioned, the 3-month age, it's more of a sea air, briny salt, mild fermentation, mellow smoke, very easygoing ham. You get to the wigwam, really nutty, really funky, great fermentation, wonderful umami. The salt on it for me is more of that Parmesan cheese rind. So you kind of, it's not that really mellow salt that you get out of a well-aged parm. But it's more of the rind. And then when you get to the Suriano, as you know, it's definitely a smooth, buttery finish. The salt is definitely that really nice, super aged 50-pound wheel parm. It doesn't bite. It's just there. Actually pick up almost a little bit of dried fruit on the end. So again, it goes back to, breed, feed, age, Terroir, the whole bit. But the age definitely plays a big time role. The wigwam for me is an amazing country ham. But you got to know country ham to be into it. Thus the gateway 3-month country ham.
Years ago, when not years ago, but we have aging rooms, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever. And there was one of the aging rooms where we always did our wigwams in, and it was ambient. And when the ham started to get around 10, 11 months old, the rooms had a hint of apple smell to it. So you knew that you were on the right track, and you knew those hams were going to be a great year. But because it was ambient temperature, we were relying on Mother Nature, as my dad would refer to, 1963 was a good year for ham. Well, we finally figured out how, through the temperature control rooms and opening up the fan units to bring in fresh air when needed. And again, that goes back to the sense of smell and touch and eyesight to make those adjustments. But you knew that you did it right when you got to that 10th or 11th month and you had that little bit of an appley sweet smell in the room. You knew you were on the right track. And finally, we eventually got our temperature control rooms to be able to produce that year in and year out by documenting, okay, well, in that year, what was unique about it? Well, the average temperatures were this, the humidity was this, and let's try to do that every time. Well, it's only taken us 95 years to, figure that out. They're not the brightest bulb on the tree, as they say, but we figured it out.
What causes that apple smell? Because that could be. I don't know. You have no clue.
I mean, I don't know what causes it. It's a fermentation. It's kind of like as you're fermenting anything, during each step of the process, there's a certain aroma that you're going to get. And if you're not hitting that aroma, then it's not that the ham's going to be bad. It's just not going to be as great.
Well, because we used to do line check when I was a chef in the kitchen, and you went down, there'd be a certain station where they would blanch pasta and hold it. And if it put off a green apple smell, that was bad. Because now when you think about fermentation, there's a lot of soluble and fermentable starch in pasta. Is there enough sugar? Is there any sugar in your cure, or is there sugar with sugar supplies within that flesh that ferment and throw that out there?
You're over my head on that one. I know that in the curing process, there is obviously in fermenting the molecules, chemically things are changing. And we found or at least I feel like if we're hitting that aroma at the right time, then I know those hams as a batch, as a lot, are going to come out tasting like we want to. You want to. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer aging. But when we were doing ambient, it was kind of hit or miss, just depending on what Mother Nature wanted to provide for you that year.
Wow.
So that was one of the big benefits of getting that temperature controlled, humidity controlled rooms, airflow too.
So do you still get the apple smell now that you've got it fully controlled?
You can, yes. Can you do it consistently? Well, under the co-packing situation we're in, as hard as I try and I give them, tips on this, that, or the other, it's paying attention to detail is a mindset. Some people don't think it's worth that effort. It's good enough. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
I try to visit as often as we can to say, look, you guys, help me out here. You need to change the temperature and the humidity in these rooms. They have the ability to do it. It's just, and they know what they're supposed to do. It's just whether or not they choose to do it or not.
I would think too, there's some element of an airborne yeast that might cause that.
Oh yeah, no question. I tell everybody, I've got some greasy boots left over from before the F and that I'm going to wear in the new facility to spread that
Contaminate
that good bacteria all over again.
Propagate. That's the word, not contaminate.
Propagate. Yeah, propagate. That's right.
Good save, Steve.
Right. Well, look, we appreciate the. We could probably go on another till cocktail hour, talking about everything.
Here we go.
Yeah.
Just have some new press samples.
Oh,
that's the old Fitzgerald Bottle and Bond spring release that only just came out now. Thank you, COVID. And it is fabulous if you can get it.
I keep my eyes peeled and keep my mouth shut if it is good, so I won't have a hard time getting it. It gets too pricey. All right, sir. Good to see you and good talking to you.
All you guys.
Yep, enjoyed it very much. We're kind of moving in the direction of maybe coming back to some of what we consider people that are knowledgeable in the industry, coming back to them and maybe throwing another person in the conversation. Because if it makes sense. So we might be calling you back to invite you back as soon as I can figure the other person to banter about it that might help, especially in the area of what do you think the country ham industry should do to get people to understand what we do and why shouldn't they be considering us more?
Absolutely. And there's no reason why we can't do a virtual ham tasting via these channels. I think it'd be a blast.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, man. Take it easy. Stay safe.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Steve. Good to see you, man. Y'all have a great day.
Awesome. See you around, guys.